Hello, my friends. And today we need to start with the fact that the negotiations with the European leaders have come to an end, and Merz has once again stated that Ukraine should close its borders to young people so that they don't leave for Germany or other countries.
So, dear Volodymyr, this also means certain expectations of Ukraine, as we've discussed in Russia. Ukraine must make sure that its young men can find decent jobs in their own country rather than traveling to Germany, Poland, or France. This is something that we have already discussed in Brussels together, and I think that this is an expectation that Ukraine can meet and will meet. So,
As a result, Ukraine, France, and the United Kingdom signed a declaration on the deployment of multinational forces in Ukraine after the end of the war. The United States will help ensure a ceasefire in Ukraine through intelligence and logistics. Joint military planning must be carried out to ensure security in the air, at sea, and on land, as well as to restore the armed force of Ukraine. These measures are to be implemented at Ukraine's request after a reliable cessation of hostilities. Europe will lead these efforts with the participation of other coalition countries, including the United States. The United States commits to supporting the forces in the event of an attack within the framework of security measures. Monitoring and verification of the ceasefire will be led by the United States. A permanent monitoring system and a special commission will be established to review violations and determine responsibility. In the event of a future armed attack by Russia on Ukraine, support is provided to restore peace and security. This support may include military capabilities, intelligence, logistics, diplomatic steps, and additional sanctions. At the same time, the United Kingdom and France are planning to establish military bases across Ukraine after the war.
And so I can say that following a ceasefire, the UK and France will establish military hubs across Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Witkoff stated that they are close to an agreement that would allow Ukraine to prosper after this war. US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said that later today he will once again meet with the Ukrainian delegation together with Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. He added that Washington and Kyiv have almost finalized the security protocols and are close to a prosperity agreement for Ukraine. We are here to act as mediators and to help in the peace process, and we are ready to do whatever is necessary to achieve it. President Trump firmly and passionately believes that these killings must stop, that bloodshed must end. But there is one major problem. Despite the fact that European countries have agreed on certain security guarantees, Russia has still not agreed to stop the war. A peace agreement has still not been signed, and there are absolutely no guarantees that Russia would even agree to allow what would essentially be NATO troops to enter Ukraine and establish military bases here. Already today, it can be stated with confidence that they are strongly opposed to this. Here is the first statement from the Russians after the summit of European leaders. NATO bases on Ukrainian territory. Are we really supposed to sign off on this crap? I'm not sure. This whole while European pact is now ready to take responsibility for Ukraine's security in the Black Sea, on land, and so on. When in 2013 the Nazi were shot and killed the Russian, Not a single European beach lifted a finger. They only encouraged the Nazis. And when Russians in Donbass started being killed, Europe and the US were sleeping and waking up with their tongues up their own asses. And now they've suddenly become active. We are forced to carry the special military operation through to its stated goals. And Europe is an enemy, and there can be no deal with an enemy. So accordingly, there is no doubt that all these statements and security guarantees will lead nowhere, since the war is still ongoing and no troops will be deployed anywhere. And Merz immediately stated that their troops will not be on Ukrainian territory, but would supposedly be deployed in a neighboring country instead. German troops could be stationed in a NATO country neighboring Ukraine after 1 year of a ceasefire, Merz said. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz made this statement following the coalition of the Willing summit in Paris, adding that any options are possible. He noted that the US and the coalition share one strategic goal. Today we focused on the contribution that Europe and its partners can make for Ukraine after a ceasefire. As the coalition of Willing, we will uphold the commitments we have made. At the same time, foreign media are already writing that all of these will lead nowhere and that the war will continue. President Zelensky's statements about ending the war are becoming more pessimistic, and the fighting may not end at all, New York Times reports. Issues related to territories and control over the occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant remain unresolved. In addition, Russia has rejected some Ukrainian initiatives. I understand that we are very close to results, but at some point Russia may block everything, Zelensky said. There is no alternative to negotiations led by the United States. Attempts by the European Union to take on the role of mediator will not speed up the process. Overall, in the end, it's obvious that Russia doesn't plan to stop, and today we can clearly see this along the front line. Ukrainian forces soldiers also speak negatively about all these security guarantees. Statements, communiques, memorandums about intentions to deploy troops, joint patrols, and monitoring of something or other. For now, this is all about nothing. Talk about 30,000 NATO troops on the western borders is just hot air. That's not how it works. Until the NATO contingent in Ukraine, and not on the western borders but much farther east, reaches around 200,000 troops, nothing will prevent Russia from living in a post-Minsk II mode, only now after a so-called deal with Trump. De facto, there will be no real end to the war, even if there is some kind of backroom agreement. That's why I don't believe in empty promises. Only the physical presence of foreign troops along the line of contact and the gray zone, as well as within a 50-kilometer zone nearby, and in sufficient numbers. Can be any kind of guarantee. Until allied aircraft are based in Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia, Poltava, Kharkiv, Chuguyev, and Nizhyn, and not in Zhashov or potentially in Uzhhorod, this also changes nothing. Overall, everyone understands that the war will not stop. So let's move on to the situation at the border. In the Sumy direction, the Russians are not conducting any new assaults for now. However, yesterday there were reports of new strikes on Russian territory. As a result, the situation there has been stabilized for the time being. In the Vovchansk area, the Russians are assaulting Prylipka and the outskirts of Vovchansk, but without success. Over the past 24 hours, the front line hasn't changed. In the Dvorichne area, the Russians are trying to break through toward Kutkivka, but they have also had no success and no changes have been recorded over the past 24 hours. In the Kupiansk direction, Russian forces are attempting to advance in the area of Redkivka, on the outskirts of Kupiansk, near Petropavlivka, and are pushing across open fields toward Kurylivka. In the Borova direction, the Russians are pushing in the area of Raigorodka. Other than that, there is no significant activity here, and the situation hasn't changed for the past 24 hours. In the Liman direction, the Russians are once again attempting to break through toward the outskirts of the city. They are also assaulting Stavky and Drobyshevo, but so far there have been no changes over the past day, although the level of offensive activity remains quite high. In the Slovyansk direction, the Russians are assaulting Zakitne and pushing past Sviatopokrovsk, indicating that the Ukrainian forces were unable to hold their positions for long and had to retreat again. They are also advancing near the village of Pazino, but over the past 24 hours there have been no major changes and the fighting continues. In the Kostantinivka direction, the Russians are attacking Pretechene, the outskirts of Kostantinivka, Pleshiyivka, Klebanbyk, Berestok, and Stepanivka, and are advancing near Ivanopilla and Rusin Yar. However, over the past day, there have been no changes yet, as all attacks are being successfully repelled. In the Dobropilla direction, the Russians are assaulting Sofiivka, Nekhanorivka, and Suvorove. However, unofficial reports indicate minor Russian advances. Dobropilla direction. The Russians are advancing west of Pankivka, reclaiming recently lost positions. The Russians have almost completely captured Nikhanorivka. They have also fully taken Fedorivka. So we are still waiting for official confirmation. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are assaulting Rodinske and increasingly entering Mirnograd with larger forces, making the situation in the city catastrophic. They are also attacking Hryshine and advancing along the western flank. Ukrainian forces describe the situation as follows. In the Hryshine area, the situation is difficult and tense. The Russians effectively control the eastern flank and continue slowly but systematically expanding the gray zone. This is not just pressure. It indicates deep repositioning and probing of our defenses for breaches. The Russians are advancing in small groups, consolidating positions, and spreading across the flanks. Notably, the Rubicon unit operates here as actively as on the Slavyansk front. Controlling logistics is a priority for the Russians. They monitor supply routes, troop movements, equipment, and rotations. They operate carefully, trying to strangle us from the rear. Meanwhile, Russian aviation strikes are being recorded, mainly using Fab 500 bombs, which in itself is a warning signal. This is preparation clearly setting conditions for a larger scenario, targeting strong points, logistics, and morale. Overall, the situation here remains extremely difficult, and despite a slight decrease in the number of attacks, the Russians continue to gradually push forward. In the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians are assaulting Filia and Ivanivka. However, so far all attacks are being repelled and no changes have occurred. In the direction of Pokrovsk, in Dnipropetrovsk region, the Russians are attacking Alexandrograd and are attempting to advance in the areas of Sosnivka and Voshneve. However, they have been unable to make further progress, and Ukrainian forces are successfully stopping them in the fields. In the Gulay-Pole area, Russian activity has significantly increased. They advancing near the villages of Solodke, Dobropilля, Varvarivka, and Zelene. They are also assaulting Preluke and Gulay-Pole. However, previous attacks on Svetopetrivka were unsuccessful for the Russians, so over the past 24 hours, the front line remains unchanged. In the Zaporizhia direction, the Russians are only assaulting Primorsk, and shelling continues, but they are unable to advance further, and no changes have been recorded in the last 24 hours. The Russians have been claiming for a week that they are finishing clearing Stepnohirsk, but they still cannot secure the area, and the Ukrainian forces are successfully destroying the attempts. In the Kherson direction, attacks continue near the Antonivsky Bridge, but the Russians have made no progress and the front line remains stable. Meanwhile, exchanges of strikes continue. Late yesterday evening, the Russians carried out attack on Dnipro. Preliminary reports indicate that the strikes targeted a kindergarten. Yesterday, strikes also continued against Russian oil depots, and there is some good news regarding Russian oil. India's largest importer has refused Russian oil, Reuters reports. Reliance has denied claims that it was expecting shipments of Russian oil to its Jamnagar refinery. Amid US and European Union sanctions, imports of Russian oil to India could fall to their lowest level in several years, dropping below 1 million barrels per day in January. The article notes that in this case, China would remain the only major market for Russian oil. As we can see, the situation for Russia continues to deteriorate. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.